Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Rather a chilly Longmeadow this morning. There's a real autumnal feel in the air, but not yet on the ground. And here in the vegetable garden, there are masses of crops still going well, plenty still to harvest. I actually think that the best time for vegetables in the whole year is round about the middle of September to the first week of October. So this is a good time, but it is the moment when I need to start harvesting my leeks. I've grown them in a cattle trough because about 4 years ago, our onions were afflicted with white rot, and this affects the whole allium family, and is a bit of a disaster. However, I've kept this container going, refreshing the soil every year, so there's no chance of spores getting in. And so far, touch wood, they've been fine. Come on in. There we go. And you can see these are in good nick. It's a variety called Havana. There's no sign of white rot. A touch of rust on the leaves, but it's not going to harm the cooking and the eating of them. And I really do think the important thing when you're growing vegetables, it doesn't matter what it looks like. What really matters is what it tastes like. Now, coming up on tonight's program, Francis tackles one of your tricky plant problems, and this week it's how best to prune overgrown shrubs. Nick Bailey investigates a revolutionary new way of combating Himalayan balsam that has become one of the UK's most invasive weed species. And Arid Anderson discovers the amazing properties of some seemingly ordinary plants. And I'm going to prune one of my climbing roses and sow seeds of hardy annuals for cut flowers next summer. Come on, Nige. Come. Go. This is the cricket pitch, where you can see that cricket is not played very often on here, but it's kept its name. I've often thought about adding good herbaceous perennials to grass and creating a meadow that is adapted to richer soil, because wildflower meadows only really flourish. You really are making a crossover from the herbaceous border to the wildflower meadow, and the two can work together. So I've got a number of herbaceous plants. Here we've got a Strantia, simply made from one plant, divided up. I've got some geranium here. This is a variety called Brookside, which has got this really lovely blue flower. I've also got some geums, again, which I divided. These will work too. I'll be adding a lot more. This is a process that will go on all autumn and into next spring. But this will start it. Now this geum, which is Lady Stratheden, which has got yellow flowers, I don't want to put too close to the hedge. This hornbeam hedge sucks up the moisture and they need quite wet ground. And now Strantia, we can just put in amongst it. And the whole point about this type of planting is you do not plant in groups and clumps. You dot the plants around and they weave in through the grass. And that's the kind of spacing that I'm looking at. Remember that you want the idea of a meadow. So simple flowers, nothing too fussy or fluffy or fancy. Simple, clear colours, and then in amongst them, you can have bulbs. So this has got a good root system, and as usual, just tear it and break it, and that will stimulate regrowth from the roots. So just put it into the planting hole, use some of the soil, and that's it. Now I can put this Astrantia in, and I don't need to add any compost or any goodness. I don't want to enrich the soil at all, because all that will do is enrich the grass and make competition, which I don't need for these plants. These are fairly tough flowering plants that will cope perfectly well in the basic soil. Now, the bulbs will go in around these, and whilst you can plant your herbaceous perennials anytime up till next April, you do need to get your bulbs in fairly soon. Now, this tiny daffodil is Narcissus pseudo-narcissus, and when you're planting very small bulbs like this, it's much easier just to chuck some on the ground and plant them where they land. And that way, it will look as random as it is. And the whole point of this is to make it look as natural as possible. If the ground is really narrow, so the day before, if you do that, the top surface will have dried up sufficiently for you to kneel on it without making a muddy mess. But the soil beneath will be nice and soft, and you can get a trowel in or even a dibber. And the absolute key to creating these tame flower meadows, using herbaceous plants, using bulbs, is your management of the grass. The grass needs to be as short as possible when you go into spring, so that bulbs like crocus will appear and you can see them. And that you don't cut the grass at all until the last bulb foliage has died right back. And that then will feed the bulb for next year's flowers. And of course, when you do that, you are going to cut off the herbaceous plants. But all you're effectively doing is pruning them to provoke fresh flowering, and then the herbaceous plants can come back. Now, we did ask you to contact us if you had any problems that you felt that we could help you with. And an awful lot were to do with pruning, and I do know that people can get in a tizzy about pruning. When to cut, how to cut, where to cut. But Frances is to the rescue, and she's gone down to Devon, armed with her pruning materials, to help sort out a tangle of shrubs.
It's a common problem, and we've all done it. You go to a garden centre and find a plant that you fall in love with, buy it, take it home and plant it in the perfect spot. But fast forward a few years and it's got out of control, which is why I've these. Lynn Franklin is a really keen gardener who's fallen into that trap in a big way. 11 years ago, her garden was bare, with just one bay tree and an air raid shelter. So, Lynn went on a shopping spree and bought one of everything. But now those plants have matured, they're taking over her garden and creating a problem. Did you intentionally create so much shade?
I like shade to sit in when it's sunny.
Okay.
But this is getting a bit silly.
I can see.
Yeah.
I mean, it's classic problems with shade. Everything's a bit leggy. And lawn-wise?
Yes.
Has this lawn ever been successful?
No, not since this has all grown up.
If it were mine, I'd be tempted to put some membrane down and just gravel this circle to make it much neater.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing with having this much shade is you've really created problems for the plants. You know, they're struggling, they're competing for light and for moisture and things. And I think what we need to do is open this space up a bit to make it easier for plants to grow. This chittalpa, I think, needs a little bit of a prune.
Yes.
Do you mind that?
No, I don't mind at all.
Right. Here. But we don't want to cut it at the ends here and just remove that because you'll find it branches. And what we really want to accentuate is the lovely shape of the actual trunk. Do you see where this is crossing here?
Yeah.
Those two branches are rubbing, so we need to remove that anyway so that disease can't get in and cause damage to each other. So I'll take it back, I think, to about here.
So this is the sort of thing you do on most trees and shrubs then?
Yes. The worst thing you can do, unless you're doing topiary, is to just clip the ends. The best thing you can ever do is take it always back to a bud, if there's a bud there, and wherever you can, create an outward-facing bud, so you're opening up the shape, you're never closing it all in. One thing you must remember whenever you're pruning anything is use clean tools and cut back with something like this as near to the trunk as you can. You want a nice neat edge that will callus over and the tree will protect itself. Happy?
Yes, I am. Yeah. That looks better.
This bed is quite a challenge, isn't it, Lynn?
Yes, it is.
So you have an awful lot of shrubs here and they're quite big and I can see you've cut them.
Badly cut.
They're not badly cut. It's difficult thing to do because you want to keep them small. So let's prune them, starting with this Deutzia. I can see that you've given this a prune already this year, just after it flowered.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, which is exactly the right thing to do. But what you've done is you've cut it down here, which again has encouraged branching. So you're creating quite a compact and quite messy shrub.
Yeah.
And what I'm going to do now, or actually what you can do, like if you need, is we'll take about a third of these stems out to the base, and then they'll grow up from the base, and then next year you'll do the same again, and on the third year you will have removed all of this, and by then you'll have a lovely kind of habit that you want. Exactly. Nice. Perfect. It's looking better. Well, it won't look better yet. It will look better in 3 years' time.
Yeah.
You've done this every summer.
When the new ones come up,
Yeah.
then I take out another 3 of the old ones.
Exactly. But in the summer, just after it's flowered, every year.
Right, I see, yeah.
Every summer.
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems here is lurking at the bottom of the garden. It's actually really big back here, isn't it?
Yeah, so this is where I've got a really big problem. And this is the baby tree. It's massive. It's been here for years. It's causing a lot of shade over here.
Over your greenhouse.
Yes.
The thing is, you could easily cut back some of these branches, especially the one that's going into the neighbours, and let them with my pruning saw. This bay tree really is a big beast. So Lynn's brought in a local tree surgeon who will make short work of it. Lynn has asked me to tackle her Corylopsis. You would normally prune this in early spring as soon as it's finished flowering so that you can get flower buds for the next year, but it restricts her access down this path. So what I'm going to do is take off some of the branches but keep it to a minimum. Whenever you're pruning a shrub or a tree, rather than thinking about what you're taking off, unless it's something that's diseased or dead, you really want to think about the shape that you're leaving behind, and specifically the bud you're leaving behind that will then grow up. And that's why it's called formative pruning, because you're thinking about the form of the tree or shrub that you're leaving. I'm going to cut this branch back to this bud here, so it'll be a smooth branch left behind, and eventually this will grow in much the same direction as the branches here already. So this Caprosmalin, you've already had a go at formatively pruning it, haven't you?
Yeah, I did it in the spring to lift it a bit because it was getting in the way.
Oh, I see, just to clear that
Yeah.
side. You can do this exactly this time of year, and it just gives this end of the garden a bit of structure, I think. How's it looking that side, Lynn?
There's still the shape's getting there. Still a lot to do though.
There. It just about does it.
Oh yeah, that looks much better.
Yeah, I'm pleased with that.
Yes.
And look, you can see your container now as well.
I'd forgotten it was there.
Had you? Well, it looks lovely.
Thank you.
Lynn clearly has a good eye and green fingers, but a garden like this can easily slip out of control. But with a little guidance, Lynn will see that regaining and maintaining control needn't be daunting.
This is a damson, and as a prunus, probably best to prune it a little earlier in the year, July. But I always remember Christopher Lloyd's great pruning dictum. The best time to prune anything is when you have the right implement in your hand and you are in a position to do the job. In other words, no time is ever better. This growth here start to get much more vigour going in this direction, which is what I want. I'm using tarred twine, which if you can get it, and not every garden centre sells it, is ideal because it's soft enough not to damage the new growth, but strong enough to last at least till this time next year. If you want these horizontal stems to keep on growing, don't tie down the ends. Leave them loose for the last 6 inches or so, and they will naturally start to grow upwards. And the more vertical they are, the more vigorous they'll be. And then we can gradually bend it down and tie it in. I hadn't actually seen this before I cut it off, but here is the last bloom from Madame Alfred Carrière. She smells lovely. You have to take my word for that, but it's an exquisite fragrance, an exquisite flower, and hopefully I've done her proud that she'll now be ready in good shape to flower even better next year. And I think the message is, this is by no means perfect. One, try and train it as you intend it to be from the very beginning. It's so much easier. But if you haven't, don't be frightened of cutting back hard. The harder you cut back, the more vigorous the regrowth will be. And next year, you can then train that new growth exactly where you want it. Now, most of our garden plants are welcome, and we've got them there because we chose them, we like them, and that's fine. But there are a small handful that can be real thugs, however beautiful they are individually. Benny's been looking at some of these over the last few weeks, and this week he's gone to Egham in Surrey to find out a new way of controlling the spread of Himalayan balsam.
Himalayan balsam, or Impatiens glandulifera, is an attractive plant from the foothills of the Himalayas in northern India and Pakistan. Growing up to 3 meters with clusters of nectar-rich flowers. Who wouldn't want to make this plant welcome in their back garden? Like lots of other gardeners, walkers and beekeepers, I was beguiled by the beauty of Impatiens glandulifera, so much so that I introduced it to a walled garden. Now within 2 years, it's exploding seed pods and throwing seeds out into their As the seed reaches maturity, either by heat...
It's very shallow, so it needs to have a very wet environment to grow. It likes boggy ground, riverbanks, wet woodland. It actually replaces biodiversity, so it really affects our native flora along rivers and also indirectly the insects as well. When it dies back in the winter, it leaves the banks bare of vegetation, and these are much more prone to erosion. You get a lot of silt going into rivers.
So in essence, by the balsam taking over, it takes out all of our native flora, which was stabilising the banks, and then because it disappears in winter, the banks are just collapsing and blocking up our waterways.
Exactly, yes.
But the good news is that the stranglehold the balsam has on parts of our countryside may be coming to an end with a completely new discovery. So Carol, how did you go about finding something that would specifically target the plant?
Well, what you do is you go back to the native range of the plant that you're targeting, looking for natural enemies that are attacking it. So this could be insects, this could be diseases. Initially we looked at insects, but none of them were specific enough. None of them only attacked Himalayan balsam. So this one here, you can see down the microscope, is a rust fungus.
Okay.
You can see the powdery spores.
Yeah.
And this is the one that we thought this would be a really good agent. In the field, it was quite damaging. And rusts are just typically really good biocontrol agents.
So we all know garden rusts on particular different plants. What's unique or special about this one?
This full of rust, they're also very damaging and they spread very well because of the powdery spores. In fact, they can go up into the wind currents and travel many kilometres to find new hosts spread that way.
So what sort of action does it have? Does it just totally kill off the Impatiens?
No, biocontrol, the aim of biocontrol is to reduce the vigour of the plant. There'll always be Himalayan balsam growing along riverways. It just won't dominate. There'll be less seed produced, the plants will be smaller, and that means the native flora can grow so much better.
For 5 years, the centre tested the rust to make sure it wouldn't affect any other plants. And now, with the green light from the government, this tiny potential solution to a big problem is being released into the wild across the country.
Now need to produce large quantities of rust so that we can get the rust out into the field at as many sites as possible. The rust will only survive on the plants. You can't grow it in culture, so you have to produce it on living plants. All these leaves will produce spores, and we very simply just tap the leaves, collect the spores in a Petri dish, put them into little vials in the freezer, and then when we have enough spores, we send them out to people who then literally go around to their patch of Himalayan balsam and spray it onto the undersurface of the leaves. So it's very low tech, very simple. And the idea is to get the rust actually established in the field on the plants, and then it will spread naturally from that. So the first year we did 21 sites, then 25 last year and 25 this year. It'll be a gradual process, so in some areas you'll start to see less balsam and then the rust will spread further. And the place I want to be is when people don't consider it to be invasive anymore.
It's a real love-hate story when it comes to Himalayan balsam. Sure, they're beautiful plants, but they're having a really negative impact on our native flora. Himalayan balsam is now such a problem that it will be illegal to buy August 2018. So I think that's even more reason for us to all avoid growing it in our gardens. Come on.
There's the river at the bottom of the garden. That's lovely. And there's all sorts of wildlife that go with it. But one of those elements of wildlife is the Himalayan balsam. 25 years ago when we came here, there wasn't a single plant. And when it first appeared, we thought Himalayan balsam follows this river all the way down. And I would say, although it is a lovely plant, I would not introduce it into any garden. Now, from a plant that, by and large, is creating more problems than good, to plants that may seem ordinary, but can have extraordinary effects. And Arit Anderson has been to Yorkshire to find out more.
We pick plants for their aesthetic appeal. In the future, we may have to choose plants for their function, those special qualities that often get overlooked. Researchers at the University of Sheffield are looking at what plants can do for us. I'm meeting one of the team, horticultural expert Dr. Ross Cameron, who's using his own garden to demonstrate some of these ideas. Ross, you've got a really pretty garden here. It's wonderful. I know you didn't plant it up just for a visual aesthetic, did you?
Not the only reason. No, it's a garden. It's a functional garden, but also it's of interest to me because I want to play with those plants that I think have particular merit or properties that we're interested in terms of the benefits it gives us as humans.
Okay. In what way?
Physical benefits, so reducing the energy we use in our house, for example. They can protect our house from the extremes of weather, they keep off wavelength, whereas something like the cedar, the small leaf stuff, is quite good for traffic volume, engine noise, what your irritating noises.
Ross, how can plants help us with pollution?
Well, again, green space helps with air quality, but to some extent we want to know which trees are best and for what positions and locations.
Yeah.
The research tends to suggest that long-needled pine trees, like Pinus strobus, for example, those droopy needles, are the best things to capture particulate matter. So those are the sort of things you get off diesel engines, that sort of type of pollution.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, those particular trees don't tolerate the toxins very well. So probably a better compromise is things like this Picea here, which have a good surface leaf area again, with lots of needles.
Right.
And again, the particles move in there and get get caught on the micro pores and things within the needles. Other plants that are broadleaf types, such as this birch spatula, is they have roughnesses to the leaf surface as well, and that can help hold some smaller particles.
Ross is also investigating how plants can naturally regulate the temperatures around our homes.
I've got a thermal image camera here that's looking at the wall and the plants in front of it, and you can see 30 odd degrees is the temperature of the wall.
Yeah.
As we drop it down into the plants, it drops down to about 15 degrees. It's about a 14-15 degree difference just because of the vegetation being there. So the plant itself is cooling the environment around it, and by de facto cooling that bit of the wall.
Yeah.
In a day like this, not too much of a problem, but if we get really warm weather, we need to think much more about effective vegetation around the building.
Who would have thought that some plants could be natural air conditioning units?
So it's about using plants, but also using the right plant. So the ceanothus protects the building by shading it.
Yeah.
The cistus, on the other hand, is cooling the environment around it, largely by reflecting light back out into the atmosphere. And then cooling by providing transpiration, water coming up and providing a cooling effect around the plant, and likewise the wall of the building too.
What happens at winter time?
Well, some of these plants are really effective at insulating the building in winter, wrapping it in cotton wool as it were. And what the issue here is you've got a wind chill factor pulling the heat away from the building in the winter time. And even things quite sparse, like this broom here, break up the effect of the wind. So they're creating a little cushion of warm air around the building, helping us stop that energy being leaked out. In the hot days you want a cool space, and likewise in winter you want to do the opposite. You want the protection, so you've got the heat trap. And plants are really good at both functions.
It's quite important then to keep these pockets of planting tucked into the house. Yeah.
And we think if you covered your whole building and it was the right sort of planting, and we do have to think about the right planting, it could reduce our energy bill by about 20 to 30%.
Which is something we can't be ignoring. No. Functional and aesthetic.
Functional, beautiful, yeah.
Like it.
They go hand in hand.
Yeah, that's great. Ross and his team hope that in years to come, town planners and gardeners like us will think really carefully about the plants we choose. What I love about these ordinary plants is that really they're extraordinary. They offer us vital benefits that can protect and nurture our homes and our gardens well into the future.
Come on now. Come on. Good girl. I do think the important thing is to see that plants are an integral part of our lives. It's not a question of us gardeners with our horticultural skill and knowledge enabling them to perform for our pleasure, but that we need them, and we need plants not just to improve the ecosystem, but to improve the quality of our human lives too. Now, what's been really improving the quality of my life over the last few weeks are these dessert grapes. They're nearly over now, and actually they're ripening faster than we can eat them. Where's the basket now? Let's have that. There's a good girl. But I can get a few more bunches before they go. The wasps did have a pretty good go at them, but enough have remained to keep us happy. That will do, and I'll take one more from up there. But the truth is, a bunch of grapes goes quite a long way. Well, that's not bad, is it? These are black Hamburg. They're no good for juice or wine. To an allotment in Devon, devoted solely to the pursuit of the perfect pint. First, though, we pay our final visit to Stourhead in Wiltshire, where autumn has arrived.
As the days become shorter and the nights longer, Stourhead drifts gently to another season, and it unveils a new and probably its most dramatic period of the year, autumn. This is one of my favourite times of year, and you can see why. It's when the whole garden performs well together. The stunning collection of trees, magnificent architecture that's been here since the 18th century. And I think this must be one of the most recognisable views. The view from the Palladian Bridge across the lake to the Pantheon in the distance, the centrepiece of the garden. And when that centrepiece is working with the collection of trees as it is today, the beautiful tulip tree on the right-hand side, and all with this magnificent backdrop of native beech trees giving that lovely rusty colour. It's picture perfect and it's beautiful. This is one of my favourite parts of the garden. And it's my favourite because it's one of the oldest parts. And this is the Temple of Flora here. And it dates from the 1740s. And the goddess Flora gives plants, flowers, wildlife to the garden. And that's what creates this wonderful scene. The autumn palette is only with us for a fleeting moment. So I make sure I spend a little time every day just soaking up the atmosphere and stunning colours of these short autumn days. Autumn really is a festival of colour, and you can see behind me how magnificent it can be. But we feel the changes in temperatures, and so do the plants. The days get shorter, the nights get longer, and the plants are responding to everything that's happening at this time of the year. And that response is really displayed quite well for us in the leaves. And in this hydrangea leaf, you can see the chlorophyll is still present, that green pigment that helps the plant to photosynthesize. And as that chlorophyll disappears, the hydrangea leaf will turn yellow, it will turn brown, and it will wither and it will fall off the plant. But it's quite a different story in this wonderful Japanese maple. There's a constant red and purple pigment in these leaves throughout the season that's overlaid on top of the chlorophyll. And as the chlorophyll is extracted in autumn, these reds and purple hues in the plant, they change colour. And then the frosts come, the temperatures drop, the acers are quite sensitive, they'll drop their leaves, put this wonderful halo underneath the canopy, and that'll be it for another year until they start the process all over again. The team here do a fantastic job of keeping the gardens looking spectacular. A major job for this time of the year is clearing the fallen leaves, because if we leave them, the grass is starved of light and air. All the collected leaves are taken away and composted. As the trees give up their leaves, it gives us the opportunity to do some crucial maintenance. Just from there, Joe, it's those two to your left and the one below it. And this one here? Roughly where your hand is, we want to bring that branch back into there.
Yeah, okay, this one?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Oh, to be young again. So at the moment, Joe's up in this tulip tree in the garden, and we need to do a little bit of autumn work and shaping of the canopy of the tree. We work on it every 2 to 3 years. As I look up the tree, I can see that there's a lot more thinning to be done in this tree. We'll thin some of the branches out that are inside the canopy, and then that will allow the wind to filter through the canopy. It's like pruning a shrub, but on a really large scale. So if you see something that's wrong with a shrub, you just nip it back a little bit, and this is just shrub pruning on a very, very large scale.
Okay, clear?
Yeah, clear. The tulip tree leaf. It's almost incomplete. You'd expect the tulip tree leaf to come like this and go up like that and be more symmetrical than it looks. But the story goes that when Adam and Eve got into trouble in the Garden of Eden, and Eve was being extracted from the Garden of Eden, she stretched out as she was leaving and she grabbed the end of a leaf, and it was a tulip tree leaf. And she took it with her and it disappeared. And I love that story. Soon all of these trees will lose their leaves, and this wonderful autumnal display will disappear. The gardeners will finish collecting their leaves, and the trees will end up silhouetted against a magnificent winter landscape, and the garden will take on a very different personality.
I guess any garden, if the light is good, looks good in autumn. It's shaping up here at Longmeadow already, and this Viburnum plicata morisii behind me always has the deepest colour of anything in the garden, and in a few weeks' time it will. Whilst the soil is still warm, it's time to sow hardy annuals. Now, you could start doing this a month ago, but it's still good for another week or so. And they will establish roots, and that's the key thing, because although the actual plants above ground will remain tiny all winter, the roots will be growing until it gets really cold. And then they will sit dormant until it warms up again, and they'll be established. And that will give you bigger, stronger plants that will flower earlier next season. You don't need a greenhouse, you don't need potting compost or seed trays or anything like that. Just a patch of ground. It's quite a good thing to do if you've got an allotment or a vegetable garden in a corner of that. This bed is dedicated to cut flowers, and always with seed sowing, take the trouble to establish a nice fine tilth. Right. Aboard. I've got a number of different seeds. We've got Cerinthe Major Purpurescens, which has got these lovely little bells of deep purple, fabulous cut flower, and then bright calendula and larkspur. All good hardy annuals. Cerinthe seeds are quite big, but we will space them out quite widely. And although, of course, you can grow these, and in spring I always do, in a greenhouse, they will be the better for growing outside. Not just because they'll have a bigger root system, but also because they will immediately start to interact with the soil, and the bacteria and fungi in the soil are absolutely necessary for healthy plants. What I will do is very lightly cover the seed over. If you run 2 fingers either side of the drill, it just automatically folds the soil over it. You can treat this just as a seed bed for transplanting. For cut flowers, they stay where they are. But there's no reason why in spring you can't lift these and transplant them into the border wherever you want them. Now, I'm going to put some larkspur. I've got deep purples and blues all in together. Perfect cottage garden plant, and absolutely ideal for cut flowers. With smaller seed like this, you have no option but to sprinkle, and that inevitably means that you will get clumps and quite thick patches. But resist the temptation to sprinkle too thickly. Now, at this time of year, of course, we are doing an awful lot of planting and planning ahead, but it's also harvest time. Harvest by no means over. And in this part of the world, there are 2 smells that I associate with late September and early October. One is that of apples, orchards everywhere, and the other, which is vanishing, but was really present here 25, 30 years ago, is the smell of hops being harvested, because it is hop harvesting season. And we went down to Devon to visit a man who has decided to grow all the ingredients for a pint of beer on his allotment.
I'm Ben Richards, I live in Collerton in Devon, and I'm a beer sommelier. That means that I spend quite a bit of my time talking about beer, but for a while now I've thought that I don't know enough about what happens before the brewery. So how you go from that bare piece of land on the farm through to those finished ingredients that you're going to brew with. I took on an allotment, first of all. It turned out to be a bit of a state. Weeds are absolutely everywhere, but the idea is to use that small space of land to try and grow everything that I need for that final beer. I need to get 4 ingredients. I need to grow the barley and grow the hops. I need to collect rainwater, and I need to work out how I'm going to get yeast off of the plot as well. Just with those 4 ingredients, you can make a perfectly lovely pint of beer. The soil is okay, it's clay, so it takes a lot of time to work with it and get it ready, but once it's actually finished, it holds those nutrients and the water in quite nicely. Well, hops need to have a certain amount of heat and a certain amount of sunlight, so there's only 2 bands around the world in the North and South Hemisphere that are ideal for growing hops, and Devon is right on the bottom of the one that runs through the UK. And with barley, ideally you need to have rain at the right time. And well, the whole plot has got 4 beds. The largest one was where I was growing most of the barley, but it was really quite nice. Throughout May and June, as it came up going green and then golden, you could see this lovely flowing wave of the barley, that stereotypical classic view that you see across the English countryside. When it came to harvest, I had originally the idea of getting a scythe or a sickle, and had many people suggest it was my pole knock moment. Luckily I didn't go for that. It turned out that because the weeds had kind of crept in a little bit, that it was easier just to grab bunches of the barley, rip it all out, take the heads off and separate them out that way. So after the harvest, what we end up with this, and this is the ear. It's got the all-important grains all on the top. I need to separate this out, keep that and bundle it up for next year. I'll cover the ground, mulch or protect the soil with that. And I start scrunching them up. It's to separate those grains from the rest of the plant and the head, really. Today is quite a good day, so as I start to scrunch these up, there's a bit of a breeze. I can lift it up and let it go. The grain will fall down, and the chaff will start to flow over with the wind. For the most of the grain, though, I had to do it in the house. There was no wind whatsoever, or it was raining. So I was in the kitchen with a hairdryer. My wife was not happy when she saw how much dust and how much chaff was flowing around the house afterwards. So I have to do it here now. And then this is what I'm after. This is the finished grain. Without this, I have no sugar, which means I have no beer. So this stuff is it's absolute gold dust for me. You can see the white inside. This is the starch that will ultimately become the sugars that we use to ferment when we're brewing. I'm a naively optimistic person. I have a tendency to see what I'm hoping to achieve at the end of it and assume that I'll find a way to fix all the problems in between, which drives my wife absolutely mad. But hopefully it's going to see me through to the end of this year. Well, this is my hop tower, I suppose. It's a central pole, and it's got 6 lines coming out for each of the plants to grow up. But these have done really, really quite well. So they've grown up to the top, they've come back down again, and they've grown back up again. So I've got this really wide column of hops, which isn't ideal, and this has really started to lean and pull, and I'm just happy it's still there at the moment. If someone was doing this themselves, I would have separate poles with wires between, so that you could have the plants going up in their own individual path. So I've got 4 different varieties here. 1 or 2 of them have done really well, so the Fuggles and the UK Cascade around that side. I've got some here, they're not papery, they're not quite feeling ready yet. And I've got others which are starting to, they're just toughening up, getting a little bit more papery and a bit more, not quite crunchy. And then when I open up the bottom of them, I can see that there's a yellow inside, yellow glands, and that's what I'm after. It's the lupulin, because they produce the sort of balance for the sweetness, the bitterness that counters off the barley. Picking hops, I would first recommend that you wear gloves. They might not look it, but they're actually quite sharp, really little barbs all along the plant. I'm taking off the laterals, the long growth that come out, or the ones that come up the top and back down again, so that I can more easily pick the hops off on the ground, not on the top of a step ladder. Well, yeast does the hard work, really. It converts those sugars into alcohol, and I'm going to try and find a culture or a strain somewhere here, because yeast is on pretty much everything across the plot, all the flowers, all the fruits and the plants. It's just a case of actually getting hold of it and finding the one that I need for brewing. So I'm going to be taking cuttings, putting those into little test tubes and sending them off to the University of Exeter, who are going to have a look at it and figure out what yeasts are hopefully on the samples. A little bit of basic research tells me that bees and flying insects, because they travel from plant to flower, it's a hotbed of yeast. So I'm going to try and gently coax some yeast off of a bee as well. got some. It takes several hours to actually do the initial brew. About a week or so for the first fermentation. Then I'll put it into bottles and I'll leave it for another 2, 3, 4 weeks to condition and improve until about a month later I'll be able to try it and see if it's worked. With brewing day coming up, I am a real mix of excitement and complete anxiety as to what it's going to taste like at the end. I just don't know yet. I hope that it's a lovely beer. I would settle for drinkable, if I'm honest. I've always grown hops in this garden because Longmeadow used to be a farm that grew hops, and we have a hop kiln. And we are surrounded by the very best growing hop country in the world. So I grow hops in the garden as a kind of tribute to that. And they make a great garden plant. There's golden hop, like this one behind me, is purely ornamental. Fabulous colour in spring and early summer. And then the normal hop, I've got some fuggles here growing in the grass borders. They are a brilliant climber for a garden. And of course you cut them right down to the ground. They regrow every year. A fabulous plant. Okay, you don't have to make beer, but here are some things that you might want to do this weekend. Produce their fruit on young wood. So now is the time to remove all the older stems. Always cut right at the base of the plant, taking out the old and any damaged wood. And the idea is to renew the entire plant every 3 or 4 years. When you finish pruning, mulch them generously with good compost or well-rotted manure, because these are greedy plants and will benefit from any amount of food that you can give them. You can collect the seeds of many plants, but it's always best to go for those that are thriving in your garden. And climbing beans are amongst the easiest. Take off the dried pods and either keep them entire or remove the beans and store them somewhere cool, dark and dry over the winter months. Verbena bonariensis is one of those plants that can seem to disappear on you from one year to the next, so it's good insurance to take cuttings now. Remove the side shoots where they join the stem, and take off all but the top pair of leaves. Insert these cuttings into a very free-draining compost and put them somewhere warm to root. And then when you see signs of growth, they will need some protection against the worst of winter weather, so they can be planted out next spring. The nights have started to get really quite chilly, and it's time to bring in the tender succulents like this aeonium into their winter quarters, which is the top wooden greenhouse, and that's kept at about 5 to 7 degrees, which is fine, and they'll be very happy all winter there, ready to come outside after the last frost next spring. Now, I don't know if there's going to be frost this weekend, but let's find out and see what the weather has in store all over the country for us gardeners.
Well, there was a lack of frost throughout September, and there's no frost on the way this weekend. It will be chillier tonight, but by the time we get to Saturday night, we're back into milder air. That's because it's going to be turning wet, and it's also turning windy. But it'll be a bright and cooler start to the weekend. Some sunshine around to begin with, but I think clouding over more across England and Wales. Showers giving way to longer spells of rain towards the southwest, but brighter further north. Saturday likely to be the day to harvest your leeks, although I wouldn't recommend wearing a white shirt. There will be some sunshine and fewer showers not far away. We'll still have a few showers wandering into eastern parts of England, some hint of sunshine perhaps, but more cloud towards Wales and the southwest, with some wetter weather beginning to arrive, and the wind's picking up too, so certainly going downhill here. And that wetter weather pushing its way northwards and eastwards overnight. The rain becoming fairly light and patchy. There'll be a lot of low clouds, so some hill fog too, and the first signs of the next pulse of heavier rain over the Irish Sea into Northern Ireland. And that wet and increasingly windy weather will sweep its way eastwards during Sunday. So Sunday, the day to be in your greenhouse or the shed, perhaps. The heavy rain likely to be over the western hills and tending to clear up from the northwest during the afternoon, with brighter skies and showers arriving in Scotland and Northern Ireland. There's the chance of some rain across southern England on Monday, but the main thing is the strength of the wind. Really windy weather and feeling cooler.
Although most of this is carefully planned and the planting is thought through and then tweaked and adjusted to get it just right, sometimes the happy accidents are the best thing in the garden. And the Nicotiana sylvestris, these great tobacco plants with their dreadlocks of tubular white flowers and the enormous sticky leaves, are just fabulous at this time of year, and I can claim no credit at all because these are self-sown. These are from plants that I had here in the mound last year, and they popped up in the wrong place, so to speak, but if it looks beautiful, then it's right. And as the garden is beginning to gently fade into autumn, they are growing strong and will go on growing strong for another few weeks yet. But I'm afraid we won't be going on any longer because that's it for today. But I'll be back here at Longmeadow at the same time next week, so until then, bye-bye. Come on, dogs, come on.
Bye.